This talk was called Start with the Birds, but I pulled a Shinkyu and just completely wrote an entirely new talk. No, that's like 3 or 4 days. So this one's called The Hope of No Hope, and talk about kind of a cauldron of life that Zen and Chan before it kind of were born out of. You know, when Buddhism moved into China around the time of Jesus, like give or take 100 years from year zero, came into China and was viewed as a foreign religion, which makes sense because it came from India. And that created some problems with it over the centuries. It came into a place where Taoism was already established, where Confucianism was already established. And, particularly from the 3rd to the 13th century, there were 4 major purges of the Buddhist Sangha. And the really big one, the one that impacts Zen the most, was in 845 CE, where they returned 200,000 or 300,000 monks and nuns from the temples, destroyed a lot of temples, killed some of the monks and nuns, and basically wiped Buddhism and Zen specifically out of the north part of China. That's kind of why so that style of Zen was very, I'd say almost normal for Buddhism. Like they read books, they studied, they sat meditation, nothing was going too crazy. All that was left were the people in the boonies down south, the wild men that were slapping each other and pulling each other's noses and jumping out of bushes and surprising each other. That's the style of Zen that was left after this gigantic purge that happened. Even the fact that there was a North and South China, this division of the country in the mind, in the centuries before Zen developed, which Bodhidharma came in like the 500 or so, 500 or 600, like from 200 to 400 or 500, the native Chinese were driven out of the north, and Turkic and I think Tibetan invaders took over and just ran the whole country in the north. And it wasn't until 300 years later that they were able to reestablish the full extent of the Chinese control over the mainland. And that there's this strange split like we have here between the North and the South in China at that time. So even when you read the big Zen Sutra, the Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, Huineng, of the Southern school of Mahayana Buddhism. So there was this big split between the two. And you have other stories of people from the north later on. And who was it? Deshan, who was a student up north. Like he was not a Zen student, he was a Buddhist student. He heard about the Zen people down south, and he's like, ooh, I'm gonna go down there, I'm gonna show them how wrong they all are. So he ended up going down and then becoming a student of Zen and becoming one of the big Zen patriarchs later on. So he had ideas about how things should be that were proven to be not vibing with reality as he lived it. So Buddhism, Zen specifically, was born from this strange like long periods of peace and then like extreme turmoil, just going and going and going, even in Japan. Now, the reason why Dogen could even go to China in 1224 is because they had finally opened up the borders and it was peaceful enough to allow traffic between the two countries. He is on the periphery of a ruling family that had ruled Japan for a couple centuries. But in the generation or so before his birth, the shoguns took over, a military dictator, and they ran Japan for hundreds upon hundreds of years. And it was a long story of turmoil and war, civil war, people like the daimyo, like the clan leaders fighting each other, trying to establish a complete control over all the islands of Japan. So they would just be roving bands of armies that you would read about coming through towns and just murdering everybody and then moving on to the next town. So this is just kind of the background where Zen was developed as a practice. These great times of peace, great times of turmoil. And segueing into the next part of this, It makes sense when you see. There's a one of the earliest stories I remember. I don't know how 25, 18, I don't remember when I read this story, but this is a story you've probably all heard before. But when I first read it, it kind of like blew my mind. So I hadn't really thought. I meditated before, but I wasn't in the Zen tradition at all. So it's the story of the farmer. I think some of you've heard it, where this version's kind of from Alan Watts, I believe, but I'm going to elaborate a little bit. Once upon a time, there's a Chinese farmer whose horse ran away. That evening, all of his neighbors came around to commiserate with him. They said, "Oh man, that stinks. No? You lost your horse. That must be terrible for you, right?" And the farmer just says, "Well, maybe." And then the next day, lo and behold, the horse comes back, and he's got 7 horse friends with him. So we've got 8 horses now all of a sudden. All the neighbors come out and they're like, "Wow, this is great. You've got 8 horses. Isn't this amazing?" And the farmer's just like, "Oh, maybe." The following day, his son takes some of these horses out to break them in. And while he's riding them, he falls off and breaks his leg. And all the neighbors come out and like, "Isn't that terrible? That's horrible, right?" And the farmer's just like, "Oh, maybe." And then the next day or so, one of these giant armies comes through looking for recruits, and they're coming to conscript the young men, and they see his son he's laid up with a broken leg, and they pass him over and they just keep on marching on. And then all the neighbors come out again and go, "Isn't that great? Your son broke his leg so he doesn't have to be in the army now." And he's just like, "Oh, maybe." So I think you're kind of seeing this point maybe. Like when I first read this story, it was like so strange because being in the West, we like to take this whole experience that we have and then kind of chop it up into, we have 2 pieces or 2 ways we can look at it. Everything's going great, at least for me, and everything's going terrible. Sometimes there's stuff in the middle where things just aren't either terrible or great. But yeah, for me, I was catastrophizing, oh, everything's terrible, or I'm loving it. And then there was hardly any in between for me. But seeing this with this farmer who's just like, oh, you can just deal with what's happening as what's happening. You don't have to bring this whole other element to life, how your life is actually happening. Let me see. This goes to the idea I think I've talked before about the second arrow, right? I think I've mentioned that, where a guy this is from the Buddha, a guy gets hit by an arrow, and instead of pulling the arrow out, he's like, wait, who was the person that shot me? Finds out who the guy shot him was. He's like, ready to pull it out. He's like, no, why did he shoot me? Goes to the guy. Someone goes to the guy, comes back and tells him why he got shot. He's like, okay, now we're ready to pull it out. It's like, no, I need to know how the arrow was made. Like, this is a nice, everything's set up perfectly. I want to know. You're like, really? Come back and find out. It's like, now you're finally gonna pull out? I need to know what glue you use to put the put the arrow together. See what I'm going at? Like, he's doing everything. He's creating this whole other like map of his mind, of the world, all these things that instead of actually dealing with the issue that he can deal with, pulling the arrow out, right? This is how I lived my life for the longest time. And that second arrow is dukkha. It's suffering and dissatisfaction. It's that thing that we do often. We create there's the situation, and then we create this other situation in our minds that is a mirror of the situation, right? Doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with what's actually happened. For me, a lot of times it was always like, oh, I don't like what's happening now. There's this whole other thing I wish were happening instead of like dealing with what is actually happening in the situation. However, one thing to note, like in regard to myself and to this story, even if the farmer is able to be all calm and collected and be like, maybe I'm dealing with how things are actually happening, doesn't mean that his son didn't break his leg, and doesn't mean that really is terrible for him, right? Breaking a leg, not fun. it doesn't say this in the story, but maybe the son was a great runner. Like his pride was that he was the best runner in the village, and now his leg's broke. And maybe his leg will never heal up like it used to be. It got set strange, they don't know, and now he has a limp. So his running days are over. No, like we bring the idea of the second arrow into this. Like he could spend his whole days being like, man, I remember when I used to be able to run. Oh, that was great. And then not do, just commiserating with himself for the rest of his life and never dealing with what's actually happening, you know? Maybe his leg is messed up and he can't, well, quote unquote, messed up. He's not able to get it to heal properly. There's a whole life ahead of him that he can still live without this second arrow of, you know, oh, I wish this hadn't have happened. I wish that something would be different. This points to, or kind of rhymes with, a sutta from the Pali Canon called the Asangsa Sutta, which talks about hopefulness, hopelessness, and those who have transcended or done away with hope. You know, in the West, typically when, it's not even when, necessarily when bad things happen, even when good things happen sometimes. And we tend to fall in this idea of like, we're going to get through this situation through hope. Like, oh, my leg got broken and it wasn't set right. I just hope that in the future, it'll all work out. It'll be better. I have this hope. Or it could be like me and be like, my leg got broken, wasn't set right. Nothing's ever going to be the same again. It's going to be terrible from now and forever. There's never going to be any ray of light ever. Everything's just completely terrible, right? This can also happen when good things happen, right? I don't know. You get a promotion at your job and it's like, oh man, now I've got all these extra responsibilities. Maybe I'm going to get fired. Like maybe I'm not. Maybe I can't even do the job. Like why did they pick me? I don't know what I'm doing. I somehow convinced them that I know what I'm doing. It can do these hopeful and hopeless views on the world quite easily. It doesn't matter. You know, really, things are going well or going bad. But let me see. Yeah. In the context of the story of the farmer, right? Everyone comes in and telling him, isn't this great that you've got all these horses all of a sudden for free? Like they just came back. And, you could turn that into something that he holds on to. Like, these horses are great. And if anything ever happened to them, I would feel terrible. So he's kind of taking his responsibility, I don't know if responsibility is quite the right word, but he's taking his control of his own emotions and offloading them on a situation that exists outside of himself. That's the same thing that we do with the hope. I hope that this great thing's going to happen in the future, so I can just kind of chill out right now. But what the Buddha is saying for the farmer, was always saying maybe, he is someone who has done away with hope, which I call the hope of no hope. He simply focuses on what is. Whether it's objectively for him or subjectively good or bad situation, he's simply abiding with what is happening. He's focused on what's happening right here and right now. And that frees you from this whole second arrow, second world, this conception that we create of how things should be or how we want them to be or how we miss them, how they used to be, right? And it frees you up to really be here in the moment and deal with what's actually happening. It can be much more skillful in this regard when you're just like with the son with the broken leg. It's like, my leg didn't get set right. Well, what can I do now? Like realistically, there's a whole, now this old world is set aside and a whole new world that he didn't have any conception of that he would enter suddenly appears, right? And this is happening like every day, really. When you wake up, we have an idea of what's going to happen, and sometimes we're right. In the factory, I knew kind of what would happen every day, but you never knew really what was going to happen every day, because everybody else has lived their own lives, and they're bringing their own lives into intersection with your own, and all of a sudden, like maybe somebody they knew had a terrible accident, or maybe somebody they knew won the lottery. All of a sudden, this whole ensemble of people completely different, right? Instead of just being the same. You only see the same. It's the same, the same, the same, the same. Everything's always different, opening up. So, I talk about this in context of my own life, and I always come back, I was already talking about the factory a little bit, but I know when I was there, I often was kind of driven crazy by these cycles of hope and hopelessness, where I was always trying to do these things like start a business or go to school, get a degree of some kind, or do something just to like transition out. So I couldn't really quit without some drastic consequences. So I had a family to take care of. So I was always trying these schemes to be able to get out of there. And I was basically like I was not dealing with the actual reality of the situation. I was dealing with my emotions about the situation. Like, I don't like this. I gotta get out. So I felt like a drowning person, right? Who's just grabbing at anything. And someone comes to save them, and you grab the person that comes to save you, you drown them, you drag them down too. It was like that type of situation, but in my mind, in my body, in my mind. Yeah. And, what really worked, it might not surprise you since this is a Zen, or this is a Dharma talk on Zen. What really worked to get me out of this drowning mentality was Zazen and living for the benefit of all beings, the Bodhisattva vows. And I'll explain specifically how it will happen, because that kind of sounds nebulous, right? That could be anything. So, for most of my time at the factory, I was kind of at a stasis, or like a standstill. What's the word? I had practiced enough so that I wasn't driving myself too crazy, right? But then, at my 15-year anniversary, it was right around this time, I had an interview with the person that would be my last boss at the place, and he happened to say, wow, you've been here for 15 years, that's a long time. And somehow, you know how I am with my birthdays, sometimes I forget like dates and stuff. I had blanked out somehow that it was 15 years. I kept telling like, well, man, 14 years. I was probably at 14 years for 2 years, right? The reality, hearing that number, 15, I'm like, I remember telling myself, I'm not going to be here any longer than 10 years. Way back when I started. And that just unlocked this entire chain of like unskillful karmic, I'd say reactions, but I created like a Jenga tower basically of unskillful karmic relationships to like my own emotions about being at this place. And that 15, the guy just pulled one out at the bottom, and the whole thing fell on the ground and exploded. And all of a sudden I'm like, got rushing anxiety, rushing thoughts. I'm like, I feel like I'm trapped. I'm like, all of this all of a sudden. And this lasted for a long time. It wasn't just like one day and then the next day I'm like, okay, it's 15 years, it's fine. No, I was like, it was a major issue for me. I was beating myself up bad because of this. So what I ended up doing was I kind of like back engineered a loving kindness meditation, almost metta. They don't talk about it too much in Zen, but it is a thing. This is all in the context of sitting zazen as well. I know I'm always telling people, like, we sit zazen, but then there's other things that zazen can also do, right? That if you go other places, it'll be like, no, zazen is one thing, always. We just sit straight and we look, and when thoughts arise, we look at them and we let them go. And that's it. Nothing else. It can be nothing else but that, exactly that, right? So for me, I didn't have a teacher. I was just figuring all the stuff out on my own. So I was able to adapt practices within the context of Zazen. And most of the time, when I wasn't going completely nuts, just sitting regular zazen like that, just this is what zazen is, that type of zazen, just the thoughts were just sitting, was fine. But I would find myself in these incredibly stressful situations like this 15 years thing was one of the ones, and a couple other ones I've talked about before. But in those times, I like my body and mind were like, you got to do something else, right? We got to study what this is, what's happening. We have to flow with this intense and crazy energy that's happening in you of dukkha, this dukkha energy. So like there was kind of three steps now that I look back on it that I undertook or kind of constructed. The first one was that was actually just to sit regular zazen and to see how crazy I had driven myself by my expectations of not having wanted greatly to not have been where I was at that 15-year mark. So I just sat and watched the body and the mind just beating me up from the inside. And while watching that, after a while, I kind of realized, it's okay to feel that way at that moment. I'd set myself up to feel terrible with my unskillful relationship to my own emotions at this time. But it was in the context of the situation, it was absolutely appropriate to feel completely terrible like that. That was a big step to be like, me telling me that me could feel the way me was feeling. It feels like I'm pulled apart into two different beings, and I'm able to tell myself that this is okay. But I mean, of course, both of those, all those me's, all four of them were the same me. Oddly enough, but that's what happens when we sit sometimes. It's like pieces of us that are seem like to have their own mind, their own motivation. That's kind of how karma works sometimes. It's like these old voices from the childhood that kind of bubble up and tell you how to run things. The second part was I ended up telling myself, this is just how things are right now. Like the whole situation being a job I didn't like, and then beating myself up, like this is just how it is. This is a reflection of Buddha nature, right? My Buddha nature is still here. My inherent enlightenment is still right here, even when I'm completely nuts and just doing everything I can to try to escape from the situation that I was really not happy to be in. Enlightenment and all that stillness that's in us is still there. It's just being covered up by the cyclone of karma, of unskillful behaviors and relationships to our own emotions. And in the third step, I told myself, okay, let's really sit some zazen and let this stillness that's in us rise up. And it sounds like just regular old zazen, but it wasn't. It was, but it wasn't. It transitioned into regular zazen, but there was some steps I had to do. This is where I kind of built metta practice up. I hadn't heard of it before, but I kind of created it. Like for my own practice, like my body and mind kind of made me do this in a sense, right? So I basically just, when there's crazy emotions, this would be when I was sitting zazen, right, facing the wall. When these crazy emotions would pop up, I would visualize myself being compassionate to myself. Weird, right? For instance, if I were on the highway and I freaked out, not road rage levels, but like freaked out on somebody just did something I didn't like. You're too close to my car, I don't like that, I'm gonna freak out. Or if somebody doesn't use their turn signal properly, like, ooh, it could, somebody cuts you off, something. Oh my God, like life is already like going, it's uncontrollable, and this other uncontrollable element comes into it and just sets you off, or set me off like crazy. So when I would be sitting my zazen, I would look at myself, and be like, this is okay, right? Visualize myself like hugging me, right? First it started with this is like a meta instruction. Started with like my mother, who's a very wonderful person, like a giant ball of warmth that just floats around, dispensing like love everywhere. So I'd imagine her like hugging me and telling me it's okay, and then eventually it was me hugging me, telling me it was okay, and then it was me hugging the person who had cut me off, telling them it was okay, and then thinking, this is where the wild fox koan comes in. So there was a whole nother period where I was really looking at my karma and discovering like, why am I so crazy, and where did all these really terrible and unskillful ways of dealing with my own emotions come from? Oh, childhood, right? And then they were passed on from my parents, and then my grandparents, and then all living beings basically who were living with suffering and dissatisfaction, right? So when I'm like thinking of this person that cut me off, and I'm thinking of myself first, I'm like, why did I get so insanely crazy, and just following that karmic path back, and then looking at this other person and then following their karmic path back. I can't know it, but they have a karmic path of some sort that led them into this situation with me, where they're also, we're mutually being very unskillful with each other, right? We're just going about our days thinking, we have this perfect idea set up how things are going to go, and then we meet each other and we both mutually destroy that idea of control that we have, this unskillful, it's like a hope right there. It's a very subtle hope where I'm hoping that the day is going to go exactly how I want it to go. And this guy came in, and suddenly now I'm hopeless because he just destroyed that map I had. So I look at this person and be like, okay, he's just like me. He's just like me. Oh, guys, I'm on Twitter too. Sorry. Yeah, and when you can, that's not an easy practice. And I still, every now and then, a flash of my mind will come to somebody in my old days. I'm like, oh, I hate that guy. Oh, I could just smash him right now, right in the face. Sometimes these people will pop into my mind, and every now and then I'm like, okay, wait a second. I'm gonna have to hug him in my mind. I'm gonna have to hug him in my mind, and just visualize myself. And it's tough, right? This isn't actually even happening. He's not here. I'm here. But in my mind, hugging somebody that I don't like is almost as hard as hugging them in real life. Strange, because they don't really exist, right? Other than in the mind. But somehow doing that, you're able to break free all of this old karma, and then you're able to go out in the world and be much more skillful because you have dealt with these it's this it's this pool of energy, right? Unskillful energy, and you can kind of skim the top off a little bit every time you're able to do something that's skillful, even if it's not even if it's just in your mind. It's crazy, but it does work. Let me see. I'm going a little long. I'll wrap up here in a sec. So I didn't even get, so that's the practices that I was doing. And then that transitioned eventually back to just normal old Zazen. But some crazy thing happened in my life, and I'm like, Zazen needs a little adjunct. It needs a little bump. And that was the bump that I gave it. So the other part was living for the benefit of all beings. This comes from Shuji. Well, it comes from the Buddha, but she's the one that really planted the seed in my mind. We have problems in our lives that are, me-wide or family-wide or city-wide or state-wide or nation-wide or species-wide or intra-species-wide or planetary-wide, right? And, it's super easy to get overwhelmed by even our problem, right? Oh, my bedroom's real dirty. I don't know if that's ever going to get clean. That's overwhelming sometimes. And that's just one room, and I live in it most of the time. Imagine all these other problems that are occurring in the world. Everyone all together, like two guys on the highway, like we have these great plans, and all of a sudden we bump into each other and we destroy the hope that we have. Are things going to go just how we wanted? That's like we're like pinball people, just smashing our hopes and dreams up. Sometimes we get together and we're able to, build up our hopes together. But people, right? Difficulties, problems seem like they're everywhere. We can drive ourselves crazy with them. But when we're living for the benefit of all beings, this Bodhisattva vow, we vow to really live for the benefit of everybody. It's tough because there's a lot of everybody's that I don't like, those guys from the past. They're like, ooh, living for them as well. And it comes down to the idea for me a lot of times, like, what can I actually do? When I've finally sat in Zazen enough where like that drowning mentality is gone, just very calm, then can really look at the situation, I won't say objectively, not even subjectively. You can just look at what is occurring and say, what can I actually do? What should I do? Like, what is possible? I've said it before, a lot of times there's not really that much we can do. We don't have anybody here doesn't have the power of like a monarch of some sort in the old days where you can just tell people, you got to do this. A lot of times those people wouldn't even do that. You have to send the army in to make them do things. So, ask ourselves, whenever we do anything, really, like, who is this benefiting? Is it benefiting everybody? Is it benefiting just me? Is it benefiting people just the people that I like? Like, who is it actually benefiting? That's like when I was in the factory too, like when I was insane trying to get out any way I possibly could. I was like, well, after a while, I'm like, who am I benefiting being this insane trying to get out of here? So I ended up just being like, okay, well, I'm going to be here for another couple of years. And then when I'm about this age, I can get out of the factory and do something else. So for me, it was basically, you can't really do anything except not be crazy, not take your unskillful energy out on other people on the road, family, friends. You can just be calm. Like even something like, maybe what you can do is sleep in. Maybe you have to sleep in today. A lot of times you can't. Maybe you shouldn't skip breakfast because you're going to be grumpy. You're going to take that grumpiness out in the world. So maybe living for the benefit of all beings is as simple as eating properly. So I wish there were a list of 10 things I could give you that you could just do so that I could guarantee that you were a good person and that life would go exactly the way that you wanted it to go. But all I have is Zazen and living for the benefit of all beings. And for me, that was enough to kind of reduce suffering, excess suffering, to a manageable extent, and to be much more skillful in the world, and to hopefully be of some benefit for my family, friends, people, just society in general, right? So in closing, I'll say that, may you live in your fundamental stillness, study yourself, see where you can be of greatest service to yourself and others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions, comments?
Well, besides Zazen, you do have precepts.
Do have precepts.
Suggest.
Yes, yes. For us at the Just Sit Zendo, Shuji only boiled it down to, if you're going to do one thing, it all boils down to living for the benefit of all people. Question yourself, are you actually living for the benefit of all? Not even people, all beings.
Yeah.
I mean, when you wash your hands, you're definitely not, because there's a little slaughterhouse going on of all the little, right? You can't get away from it. Even the Buddha saw that when he's like a little kid. His father was plowing the fields and he saw all the worms being chopped in half, and he was horrified by it. He's like, we have to eat, right? There was another Jains back then, which was, I don't know if you know about the Jains. They're still around, but some of them pop up in the Pali Canon And their big thing was absolutely create no karma at all. So they would have practices, and this is one of those, so I know like the middle way, this is on the extreme where they would just lie down, not eat, not move, hardly breathe, the guys that have the masks on. And for them, a lot of times, like the best thing you could possibly do is just die. So a lot of them would just starve. Not a lot. It was like their holiest men would just starve themselves to death. And women. They didn't. I don't know if they still do this or not. But back in the day, instead of shaving their heads, they would just pluck each one out one by one. You know, the more pain you could have, you could cancel out karma, negative karma that you had created. So this is kind of this. I mean, the Buddha basically almost starved himself to death trying to get rid of his karma, right? And he said, this is crazy. You know, we have to be able to live out in the world somehow. Yeah, that's why he formulated the middle way. And now living for all beings is this middle way as I can see of living. It centers you, but also doesn't center you, right? It shows that you are part of a whole, I mean, I wouldn't say group, just the entire universe, right? You're an element of every single thing, whether you like it or not. You know, we spend lots of time being like, no, just me, only me. I'm decide all this stuff. It's all for me. But no, we take the Bodhisattva precepts and we tell ourselves, and we vow to ourselves and to the whole Sangha and to all other beings that we will live with this idea in mind that we're living for everybody. Right. Any questions? I'm passionate about this.
It was well received Dharma talk because someone I was biking here just on 33rd Street or whatever, and some guy drove around me very quickly, and I gave him the burden, and immediately felt pretty terrible.
That's like the first steps, right? You catch yourself doing these things, and after a while, I was talking to someone. I don't know, it was somebody. There's a whole thing where when you sit, you know, when you get deep enough into this practice, because I've been sitting so much meditation, way more than normal, so much that I used to be, you know, catch myself doing these unskillful things, and now a lot of the skillful things I see, it feels like I can, you know, like my Python and the Holy Grail, haven't seen this, like the guy running on the two guards, and he's running across the field, and they're just like watching him, and they're like, and then he's still running, like, huh. And then he's like, they look, it's been like a minute, and he's still running. That's what it feels like with these unskillful things. Like someone will do something, and then in my mind, I can just kind of see it congeal and going, let's get him. I'm like, dude, I saw you coming from like super far away. We're not going to get him. I know that would be fun, but we can't do that. It's not living for the benefit of all beings. It's just going to cause this whole ruckus, you know. He probably doesn't even realize that he's doing what he's doing. You know, it's just running on karma. You know, we all kind of run on karma. So, yeah, that's where the compassion bubbles up too. We're able to see, like, okay, this guy or girl or whomever is just running on these karmic fumes. You know, they don't have that full tank of compassion like we hopefully have with our practice. They're just right on that empty, and they're just looking at it, and they're like, ugh, super stressed out, everything's, ugh, you know.
The light comes on.
The lights coming, like all these weird lights are coming on, you're trying to ignore them, like, that's kind of, it's another thing. The body and mind, you know, when you sit enough zazen, you realize that all these thoughts and itches and they're all, our body's like a gigantic alarm clock. We're like a giant check engine light. Sirens are going off in our body and mind to tell us that things are wrong. And a lot of times these sirens are based on karma, right? So old things that we've done. So they might be alerting us to things that are incredibly not skillful to do, right? Like that alarm where like the guy cuts you off and like the alarm goes like, oh, we gotta take care of this problem. Let's get him. Like, no. That's not skillful. You know, if you have an itch on your leg, maybe, you know, you could, I guess that's skillful. I don't know. But that is good training to not, right? You know, you got that itch that starts a minute or two into Zazen, right? And you're like, oh my God, do I just do I just do this or do I sit with it? And you're sweating like, ugh, and it's like, it'll just go away right after a while, and then it starts getting worse. It's like, ugh. This is great practice for dealing with things like on the road, right? Instead of just reacting to it, we stand back, and that itch looks like it's across the football field or whatever, and we're like looking at it, and it's just screaming and shouting and yelling for us, trying to get us to do something, right? I don't know how I manipulate me, but it's trying to manipulate me into doing something. It's like our body is a giant baby. A baby only has one word, right? It just cries, whether if it's hungry, if it's sleepy, if it's just got an earache, if they have an earache, Our body is the same. It's like crying babies all over our body and mind, right? What do you do with a crying baby? You take care of them, right? Almost. Maybe it's like 3 a.m. You're like, you can just let them cry tonight. You can do that with yourself too, but this body is dumb in a sense, but it's also incredibly smart because it's been crafted by time and to keep us alive. But doesn't necessarily mean that the alarms that are going off in the mind and body, emotions are like an alarm too. They're telling us, this is great, I like this, or this is terrible, I don't like this. But you don't necessarily have to take their suggestions at face value. You can take them under consideration. It's like duly noted body. And we're going to see what's actually skillful to do. It'll never stop. Yes.
I will admit, over the past week, going through quite a few kind of doom spirals
Sure.
in my head, and Zazen has definitely helped me kind of recenter myself and get out of those. But then I keep going right back into them, so I need to think about that some more. I think really appropriate what you were talking about, how we need to look at what can I do, realistically with these things, and are these even problems I have any ability to tackle in a realistic way. Anyway, just an observation from my last week.
Yeah, it doesn't help that we have the entire world on our phones. Sometimes I'll get these alerts that are just like there was a landslide in, I don't know, Tibet or something. I'm like, wow, that's terrible, but I don't know why I need to know that. I mean, do I need to know that? Or if there's, wow, maybe I should. I don't know. I mean, if this were the 90s, there'd be catastrophes happening everywhere in the world. You'd never hear about them ever, right? Unless they were very significant to us, egocentric. But even like little things, you'll get local news from, I don't know, Tennessee, like why about something that, like there was a robbery at the gas station in Birmingham or something. Like, just getting all this negative news. Like, where's the good? Okay, I'll take the bet. Where's the good news? Give me some good local news from Birmingham. I'm sure somebody's done something great. There was a local birthday party that went perfectly. The little girl got exactly what she wanted, and everybody was happy. All her friends showed up. Like, why don't I hear that news? That'd be nice.
Dog bite mom.
What's that?
Because it's dog bites mom.
That is dog. Yeah, you're right. I certainly react to the negative news. I'm like, it's still like in my head right now. I'm like, oh, yikes.
Man cut off in traffic. Did not give birth.
Yeah.
Big front page,
No one would believe that story.
I know.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's not an article.
Yeah. There was nice news once during COVID. Krasinski had like a nice news network. Do anybody remember this? It's like on the internet. Like he'd be like, here's some news that's of good things. I don't know what happened. I think he sold it after COVID kind of died down-ish. There's room for that somewhere. I'm assuming you could do that. Start the good news.
Content that doesn't sell.
Yeah. This stuff. I mean, we're here doing this, and this is kind of like we're in that realm as well, right? There's not a lot of us, but there is definitely there's some of us that are trying to work for everybody's benefit, right? I mean, even like the churches as well, like across the street, Augustana, they're all good people. They're kind of on that same vibe as well. So there are people who are trying to you know, further the goals of the bodhisattvas. So even if they don't know it, you know. But I can keep going. Throw a topic out. Go on. Okay.
Announcements?
Oh, announcements. I don't know. It's the same announcements as last time.
Okay.
Rohatsu.
Everybody here.
Actually, yeah, next weekend is important for people to know. If
Oh, that's
you know
right.
anybody who wants to do an introduction to
That's right.
Zen, that'll be Saturday
right.
morning. And then Saturday afternoon, we're having a Sangha work day from 1 to 3 in the afternoon.
I forgot about that.
So just 2 hours, if you can come and contribute and.
Super fun,
You know,
actually.
hopefully as many
Yeah.
oak leaves as can will fall this week.
Yeah.
We can get that.
We're not making a lot of progress. Just a lot of trees.
Pardon?
There's a lot of trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of trees.
Bring out the shake it.
Oh, yeah.
How they pick the apples, yeah, shake.
Yeah. They did pick up the leaves too, so.
And
That's
Daishin
good.
and his family will be here, so if, anyone wants to come and intermingle with the cave family, that'll be
Yeah.
nice.
Friday at some point that I don't know what time yet. I'm assuming it's Friday,
I'm not sure
right?
when he's gonna be coming.
Is he here?
Nope. And he'll be here giving Dharma talk next weekend.
That's right.
And do not forget that Rohatsu Sesshin is coming. And also you'll probably start getting some messages about a fall fundraiser for Giving Tuesday will be coming out.
When is
soon.
Giving Tuesday? So Tuesday of.
It's
Thanksgiving?
actually
December.
end of December. End of
Tuesday after.
See, I don't know anything about this.
It's the Tuesday after Thanksgiving.
After Black Monday.
Yeah.
Cyber Monday.
Oh.
Which is after Black Friday.
Yeah,
It's Giving Tuesday.
Giving Tuesday.
After Cyber Monday.
Right, yeah. So if you haven't spent all your money, you can give it to us.
Yeah. You should probably do it before then. Like, before
Yeah,
Thanksgiving.
you'd think that, wouldn't you?
Timing is off.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Obviously, the meditation times, I think that's probably good for the announcements. We will have a memorial service after this service for David Spica. So if anyone who can stay around, we will chant the Daiish and Dharani. We will go outside and finish the ceremony there. It's a beautiful ceremony, so if you can stay, please stay.
If
That's-
you,
that's
stay for
today?
tea and
Right after,
conversation.
and then tea and conversation after that. Yeah.
Okay, closing chant.
Are we gonna bow out?
Pardon?
Should we bow out? Let's
I thought we
move
were
our,
gonna do that from our seats.
we're gonna move our cushions back.
Yeah,
We'll
well,
stand behind us, we can bow out.
yeah, probably should.
Yeah. Formal way. What do you talk about?
If you can actually stand up.
To, Getsu, and then maybe this merit extend universal.
May this merit extend universally to all, so that we, together with all beings, realize the Buddha way.
Oh,
stay.
We get like 5 minute break.
Oh yeah, that'd be good. Does everyone have a book too? Booklet? We're gonna need it for the chance if we do stay. So if you're gonna stay, you don't have one,
If
grab
you're
one.
gonna stay for tea and conversation, let's speak up. Stay, this is fairly short, so.
Do you want a big stick with this?
No, we just need the little one.
Oh, okay.
Do a little smudging.